Hello, everybody. Once again, we get this wonderful opportunity to study God's Word together via WOW Live. Word on Wednesday Live. Before I get started tonight, I want to wish Debbie, my beautiful wife of 32 years, 5 months, and 10 days today, I want to wish her happy birthday. We got engaged to be married on May the 31st, 1988, and that was a night of a blue moon. That's the second full moon in a month. When you have 2 full moons in a month, the second one's called the blue moon. And counting that one on May the 31st, 1988, we have been through 15 blue moons in our time together. And it's always a celebration when I see a blue moon to think about our love and how we got together. And so happy birthday, Debbie. I love you very much. Also, today is grandson Gideon's birthday as well, his 3rd birthday. He's the youngest of 4 grandchildren, but he's not going to be left behind. That's his daddy down below there, tossing him up about 20 feet in the air. He was falling down at this point, and I think Dylan caught him. I'm not entirely sure. No, of course, that's a photo trick. But anyway, but he and Gramsy get to share a birthday on St. Patrick's Day, of all things. So it's a really exciting time for them. This is a pretty awesome thing to have their birthdays together on the same time. So happy birthday, Gideon. We love you too. And you would probably want to talk about monster trucks, but I can't talk about monster trucks tonight, so we'll have to do that another time. Let's get into Daniel chapter 3 starting out, and then chapter 4 actually is our topic for tonight. Bible teacher Michael Heiser has said this, that if you read something weird in the Bible, it's likely something that's important. God's trying to get our attention with something, and tonight's chapter in Daniel tells a rather weird story towards the end of the chapter. I guess Daniel chapter 4 is actually weird on a couple of levels. At least it's different. One weird thing is that chapter 4 is written by King Nebuchadnezzar himself, the king of Babylon. And he writes this. What we have in Daniel 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's personal testimony of how he came to place his trust in Daniel's God, the Most High God, as he calls him. And it all begins with yet another dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. But before we get into that chapter, I want to do a brief review of what we have seen of Nebuchadnezzar so far in our study in the previous 3 chapters. You might recall that back in 605 BC, God had given Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. That's how the book of Daniel actually starts. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged it, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. So the Lord is in control of this situation. It was during this exile that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were all taken to Babylon as well. Some say that it happened a few years later. Others say 605. It makes it easy for me to just say 605. And they refused, if you'll recall, they refused to eat the king's food and drink that was provided for them. And after 10 days of eating a separate diet, they looked, as the text says, better and fatter in flesh than the other young men. And I think it's important to realize that they were not doing this. I want to point it out again. I mentioned it then, but they were not doing this for health reasons. Okay? For them, this dietary law was religious. It did not have to do with their health. Was it a healthier diet? Could well have been. I don't know. I'm just simply saying that they were doing it not for dietary reasons as far as being healthier and looking better or anything like that, having clearer skin and whatnot. They were doing it because this is what the Lord wanted, okay? And so it was an obedience to the Lord thing. And all 4 of them, after looking better than the other guys, also excelled in their interview that they had with King Nebuchadnezzar. And they were advanced in the king's palace beyond the other young men that were with them. Perhaps in this incident, Nebuchadnezzar would have made note or taken note of their abilities. It might have made them shine a little bit more before him. And that would pave the way for chapter 2. And I think it's important to note this because what we're seeing is, it's not written straight out, but behind the scenes, God is working on Nebuchadnezzar. That's what we're seeing. In chapter 2, we saw the kind of ill-tempered anger and irrationality that Nebuchadnezzar could sometimes demonstrate. When some of his wise men were unable to tell him the content of his dream, and it was just some of them that were there, the king ordered that all the wise men in his kingdom, including Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would also be executed. Okay? All of them. And the three young men, Hananiah, I forgot their names already. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah became Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was their given Babylonian names. But they're all going to be executed because these men couldn't give the right content or the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So the four young men, they got together, they prayed, and God made known to Daniel the dream. And Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar the content of his dream and also its interpretation, what the dream meant. Now Nebuchadnezzar is no longer angry. Now he bows down before Daniel. And he claims to recognize that Daniel's God is the God of all the gods. In Daniel 2:47, there in yellow, you'll see the king answered Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Slowly, God is making himself known to this Gentile king. But we next see Nebuchadnezzar's pride on display as he uses, I believe, that revealed dream of that great image where he's the head of gold. I believe he uses that to set himself above everything else. He places a golden image of himself in the plain of Dura, and he demands all the officials of his kingdom bow down before that image. Daniel is apparently out of the kingdom on official business somewhere. We don't see him anywhere in chapter 3, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse to bow before this golden image out there on the plain. Now you would think that Nebuchadnezzar would be catching on here. He has claimed, as we saw, to know that the God of Daniel is the most high God of all gods. But I suppose the actions of these three men challenged him in his pride. His ego was bruised, and so he sentences them to death in a fiery furnace. Now, in fact, that is what he had said. If you do not bow before this image, you will be cast into a fiery furnace. So he pretty much put the gun to everybody's head to make them bow, okay? I don't know what I would have done. These three young men did not bow. Then he sees a fourth man in the fire after casting them into the furnace. And he looks to Nebuchadnezzar like he is a son of God, a divine being. It could have been an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. Many people have believed that over the years. Many teach that and still believe it today. And it could well have been him. But it also could just as well have been a son of God, an angel. Nebuchadnezzar, would he have known about prophecies of the coming Jewish Messiah? Probably not. And so he wouldn't have thought about Christ or anything like that. But when he said a son of God, he's talking about an angel, an angelic being, a divine being, a heavenly being. And in the end, it really doesn't matter. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego emerged from those flames with no hint on them or about them that they had ever been anywhere near a fire. Okay? It's quite amazing. Nebuchadnezzar himself is overwhelmed at this. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. And so he's still got some of that extreme attitude in there. He's ready to cut anybody in pieces, but it seems to be progress in some way. The king is still a pagan worshiper of many gods, but he is seeing the greatness and the power of the God of Israel on display in preserving these three young men. And when chapter 4 begins, written from King Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, when we start reading the chapter, we can see right away that some kind of change has taken place in Nebuchadnezzar's heart. Obviously, he would have written this chapter after the events of the chapter had happened. Okay? Now, that doesn't always happen in Daniel. Some of it is prophecy, but not in Nebuchadnezzar's case. Something changes him in this chapter, in this story he's going to tell. Look at what he says in the first 3 verses here to get things started. Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. He's writing to everybody. This is a letter. You can tell by its opening greeting. He goes on to say, I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. It's a personal testimony now. How great are his signs, and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Recall that the segment from Daniel 2, verse 4, all the way through the end of Daniel 7, is written in the language of Aramaic. That is the dominant Gentile language of that region in that time period. All right, it's sort of like English would be today, or like Greek was during the time of Alexander the Great and his conquering. It became Greek, and then Latin was a common language for many nations when the Romans were in control. At this time, Aramaic was the language that they had common with a lot of other nations. Nebuchadnezzar's testimony, then, is written in Aramaic. It's recorded here for his own people to read, and it's even meant for those beyond his borders. His greeting says, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Who knows, he may have sent this out and had it translated to other nations. I'm not sure. But it's a writing that comes from him. How great are God's signs, he says. How mighty are his wonders. Nebuchadnezzar gives testimony to the amazing things he has seen God do. And then note he says, in the yellow I have it, his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. This harkens back to the prophecy of the great image, back in chapter 2, back to that stone cut out without hands, which smote the image of the Gentile kingdoms upon the feet of iron and clay, and then turned the iron, the clay, the silver, the bronze, and the gold all to dust. And it all blew away. The wind blew it all away. And then the stone, not cut with hands, grew into a large mountain that filled the whole earth. Daniel 2:44 says, and in the days of these kings the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. In chapter 4, as it concludes, Nebuchadnezzar is now acknowledging the truth of the conclusion of his dream that he had had. He says that God's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. So what is it that changed his heart? The truth of God and his word, when it is acknowledged as truth, will change a person's heart forever. Now in Daniel 4 and verse 4, starting there, Nebuchadnezzar begins to tell his story after this declaration of how mighty and powerful God is. And as I said, this one also involves a dream. Verse 4, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers came in, and I told them the dream, but they did not make known to me its interpretation. But at last Daniel came before me. His name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my God, but in him is the Spirit of the Holy God. This reflects the change that's happened in Nebuchadnezzar. It's considerable. And I told the dream before him, saying, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the Spirit of the Holy God is in you, and no secret troubles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen, and its interpretation. Now this account, you've probably guessed or seen or observed, basically has the same pattern that we saw in Daniel chapter 2, minus the threat of execution of the wise men. All right? Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It troubles him. He calls for his wise men, and in this case, he tells them the dream. He doesn't try to help make them guess the content or figure out the content, but still, they are unable to interpret the king's dream. But then Daniel arrives. And Nebuchadnezzar tells him the dream. And he further tells Daniel he knows that the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. He has the Holy Spirit in him. He believes God will reveal the dream to Daniel. This represents a progression of trust on the king's part. He's growing closer to understanding who this God is. Nebuchadnezzar relates the dream. These were the visions of my head while on my bed. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. So a great and tall tree in the midst of the earth, visible to the ends of the earth, strong, a landmark to everyone. It's beautiful, bountiful, food and protection for all. I like the background image that I got here for this slide. I'm going to take away the verses there so you can see it better. Take a look at that. Look at the ground beneath the tree. It's a map. See the water off to the left of the tree? That's the Mediterranean Sea out there. If you look carefully in the lower right corner, you'll see two inland bodies of water. One's larger than the other. The smaller one is up to the north. That's the Sea of Galilee. And the larger one south of Galilee, that's the Dead Sea. So that's Israel right over there. The tree is positioned right where Babylon appears on the map. And so that's key to understanding what the tree is. It represents Babylon. The tree also represents Nebuchadnezzar himself, as we'll see. And the king is identified with his kingdom. That is often the case with kings and rulers. And of course, it would be true of Christ as well. So let's read on. Verse 13, starting there. He goes on to say, I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, Chop down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it, and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. This decision is by decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. The watchers decree. They pass down the sentence that this great tree is going to be chopped down and stripped of everything. The beasts and birds are commanded to move on, but the tree stump is to remain in the ground, bound with iron and bronze. In the meantime, the one who has fallen is commanded to eat grass with the other animals. He's given the heart of a beast, and 7 times shall pass. The watcher's purpose for this decree, they declare, is to glorify the Most High God, letting people know that God reigns supreme over any and every kingdom or domain of humanity. He sets up a kingdom on the earth. He gives it to whomever he chooses, sets it over the lowest of men. So, who are these watchers? Well, they are angels with a specific task. From the sound of this decree, the way it reads, it would seem that these watchers have direct connections to the nations of the earth. And it's interesting, there's a verse in Deuteronomy that lends some credibility to this idea. Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 8, and I'm using the English Standard Version here. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Now, this verse describes what happened at Babel, specifically referring to the formation of the different nations of the world. Just take this verse in tandem with what we've already read in Daniel 4:17. I have it set down below there. God rules over the kingdom of men. He gives kingdoms to whomever he chooses. Therefore, he would be the one to give to each one of the nations here its unique inheritance. He is setting them all up. This is right after Babel. He did this initially when he divided mankind, as it says in the verse, and that happened at Babel. God set the boundaries. He established the borders of each nation. How? According to the number of the sons of God, or the angels who were assigned to oversee, to watch over, hence watchers, to watch over the nation. Each nation has its own watcher. Of course, there was a rebellion of these original watchers. I don't have time to get into it all right now, but Psalm 82 describes how the divine council of the sons of God, how they failed in their duty to care for those nations, to care specifically for the weak in those nations, the fatherless, the afflicted, and the destitute. In other words, the oppressed peoples of the nations. Instead, as you can read it in Psalm 82, these rebellious watcher angels, they sided with the wicked leadership of the nation at the expense of the oppressed. When we get to Daniel chapter 10, we're going to discuss there a wicked angel, identified there as the prince of Persia. Each nation has a watcher assigned to it, and the watchers rebel and become wicked themselves, sinning against God. That's what this whole chapter is about. Notice down there, you are God, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Let's get back to Daniel chapter 4, looking now at verse 18. Oops, we went too far. Back it up. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare its interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able. Why? For the Spirit of the Holy God is in you. Nebuchadnezzar says God, the Holy Spirit, is in Daniel. He says it 3 times. And Nebuchadnezzar now believes that Daniel can indeed provide the interpretation, for God will show him. We already know this huge tree represents Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. And the watchers have called for it to be cut down. What exactly will this mean? Well, here's verses 19 through 25, a little bit longer section this time, but hang in there. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for a time, and his thoughts troubled him. So the king spoke and said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its interpretation trouble you. And Belteshazzar answered and said, of course this is Daniel, My lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. So you can tell Daniel knows that this dream is going to speak against Nebuchadnezzar, and he's reluctant to tell Nebuchadnezzar the news. Not that he's scared for himself, I don't think. I think he really cares about this king, whose mind is changing toward Daniel's God. He goes on and says, The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely, and its fruit abundant, in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and in whose branches the birds of the heaven had their home. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. For your greatness has grown, and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. Again, we know that this is the meaning of the tree, right? We've already seen that on that map that we looked at earlier. It's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar being the head of gold in that dream of the great image in Daniel chapter 2. God has blessed Nebuchadnezzar with this position. You can tell God is working to reach Nebuchadnezzar's heart. The thing stopping the king from surrendering to the Lord is this pride that is resident in his heart. Daniel goes on, And inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, saying, Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the ground, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field, till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. And this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. And now we're going to find out what strange set of circumstances has been decreed by the Most High God for Nebuchadnezzar in the near future. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. This they here are these watchers. They are going to do this to you. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times or 7 years shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Daniel now tells Nebuchadnezzar what he will need to do to turn from his sins, which have brought this upon him. Verses 26 and 27. And inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you, after you come to know that heaven rules. Verse 27 is the clincher here. Therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. For a time, Nebuchadnezzar is going to be off the throne of his kingdom. This is what was meant when the watcher commanded that the stump of the great tree would remain and be protected and preserved with that iron and bronze, to mark it, saying, it's coming back. The tree will return, meaning that once Nebuchadnezzar comes to understand that God is in charge of the nations, he will be returned to his throne. And I find it fascinating here that God tells Nebuchadnezzar to show mercy to the poor. This was exactly the sin of those watchers who rebelled against God. They did not show mercy to the poor, as was described back in Psalm 82. Don't show partiality to the wicked, God had said. Don't be in league with those wicked people in leadership in the nation. Rather, give justice to the weak, give justice to the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hands of the wicked. So here's the deal. If we consider Nebuchadnezzar to be a type or a representation of the leadership of the Gentile nations that continue to this day, we can see that in this chapter, God is giving us a snapshot of the kind of wickedness that will tend to categorize those nations throughout the times of the Gentiles. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar is that head of gold on that image, which represents the times of the Gentiles. It stands for all of human history until Christ returns. And that image is going to be destroyed. That whole system is going to be blown away by the Lord Jesus Christ when he returns. He's going to set up his kingdom. If you're jotting down notes, make a note right now to go and read for yourselves Revelation chapter 19, verses 17 to 21 in particular, and see what happens when Christ returns. Nebuchadnezzar typifies here the arrogant pride of the wicked rulers of this world. For Nebuchadnezzar personally, God is right now giving him an opportunity to repent of all this. So many of the world's leaders have not, nor will they ever repent. It is this very spiritual wickedness in high places throughout human history that's going to bring about the one world empire of the Antichrist at the very end. You give Satan enough to work with, he can do a lot. And when people are giving him their hearts, as they are, a lot can be accomplished for his cause. When you see the leadership of the world's governments doing things which make no sense to you, and when you see them encouraging wicked evil, such as the slaughter of young and of old, you start looking up. You start watching. You start praying. The time is growing short. Things are coming to an end. Leadership in the nations is abandoning righteousness and morality and good ethics and care and compassion. Let's now go back to Nebuchadnezzar and take a load of his prideful attitude. Verses 28 to 30 of Daniel 4. All of this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. I believe this is Daniel writing at this point. At the end of the 12 months, he was walking about the royal palace of Babylon. The king spoke, saying, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty?" He's quite full of himself. A year goes by. The dream of the tree being cut down fades into the misty past. He leaves all that behind, and Nebuchadnezzar develops this case of what I call Babelitis. Come, let us build a city and a tower that reaches to the dwelling place of the gods themselves, and let us make a name for ourselves. We're worth it. The king of Babylon says, "Look at this great Babylon I built by my own power, to honor my name, to celebrate my magnificence and my majesty." And while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. "King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. And they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Wow. Sure sounds like Nebuchadnezzar completely forgot all about that dream and about its interpretation, but the Lord didn't, and he suddenly reminds Nebuchadnezzar here. The watchers will be carrying out this very strange judgment upon this world leader. The text says, they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like an oxen, and 7 times or 7 years shall pass over you until you know, until you understand, Nebuchadnezzar, that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and he gives it to whomever he chooses. That very hour, the word was fulfilled concerning Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from men and ate grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like birds' claws. This sketch of Nebuchadnezzar in his beastly condition was drawn up by 18th century artist William Blake. Blake had quite an imagination, very fascinating. He was quite a visionary. His work makes him seem like the forerunner of a lot of the fantasy and comic book artists of our own time. I think he captured quite well the essence of what had happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Get a load of the claw-like nails on that man's feet, the animal-like posturing, that wild hair growth, and the vacant despair on his face. You know, I'm reminded of the demoniac of Gadara, whom Jesus delivered from a legion of demons in Mark chapter 5. That poor man was driven into the wilderness by those demons. He lived among the tombs of the dead, not wearing any clothes, cutting himself with stones and crying out in pain and anguish and craziness. And when they tried to bind him in the communities, he broke the chains and escaped off into the wilderness again. You know, the comparison between him and Nebuchadnezzar's 7 years of animalistic behavior is also interesting, considering that both conditions were caused by beings from the spiritual realm. Demons in the case of this man here, of Gadara, and the watcher angels in Nebuchadnezzar's case, holy angels. Though I don't believe Nebuchadnezzar was possessed as was this man of Gadara. I don't think that's what happened. But nonetheless, the similarities to me are kind of striking. Some Bible scholars have speculated that Nebuchadnezzar suffered from lycanthropy, which, from what I understand, is a psychological disorder where a person believes themselves to be a wolf. There are many accounts in folklore, especially in Europe, of the wolf man or the werewolf. Red Riding Hood is considered to be a werewolf story, actually. Some of those fairy tales that we grew up on as kids, they were pretty scary. The things that happened and everything else. Be offensive today. Today, Dr. Seuss can't even draw a Chinese man and without causing a ruckus. Anyway, it could be that Nebuchadnezzar was suffering from lycanthropy. Some have said that. But God is certainly not limited to some clinically recognized psychological condition to accomplish what he wants. He can do what he wants. God can bring a person to just such a weird state as we see Nebuchadnezzar in, that God might get that person's attention. And that's what's happening here. God certainly redirected the attention of Nebuchadnezzar. Verses 34 and 35. And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth, including me, are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" After humbling 7 years of living like an animal, Nebuchadnezzar's reason returns to him. And he had now come to a place where he truly acknowledged God for who he is. Notice how Nebuchadnezzar says, all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he found himself to be, for 7 years, pretty much nothing, except the spectacle. God does as he wills, both in the realms of the armies of heaven and among all of the earth's inhabitants. Never forget that. No one can question God in what he does. No one can prevent him from acting according to his will. The kingdom of God is forever. Verses 36 and 37, at the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth, in his ways justice, helping the poor, the weak, the oppressed, the deprived. And those, Nebuchadnezzar says, who walk in pride, he is able to put down. Nebuchadnezzar's life, as is recorded in Daniel, is a real study in how God works in the heart of a person to bring them to acknowledge him, to get their attention. You know, Nebuchadnezzar kind of runs the opposite course that King Solomon ran. Think about it. Solomon's heart was turned from the Lord to other gods by his wives. 1 Kings 11:4 says, for it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. Nebuchadnezzar's heart turned from those other gods and turned unto the Most High God, the creator of everything. In some ways, I think you could almost say Nebuchadnezzar had the better life. Fascinating. I don't know if that's true or how we adjudicate things like that, but he ends well. I think about what we read in the beginning of Daniel's book, how God gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, right into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. God is working here, see. Later, Nebuchadnezzar, as an instrument of God's hand, would destroy the temple that Solomon had built. Through Nebuchadnezzar, God is showing his rejection of what his people Israel had become under this wicked capitulation to idolatry. As we'll see later in Daniel, God is not done with Israel, but he really is done with Israel's idolatrous ways. Think as well of the repudiation of idolatry that we have seen in the book of Daniel. There's the great image of the king's dream in chapter 2, something obviously made by human hands, the image of a man formed by men. And it represents all the man-made kingdoms of the earth, all the times of the Gentiles. Remember, it means the control over the city of Jerusalem from Nebuchadnezzar all the way through the Antichrist yet to come. And when the Lord Jesus returns, a stone not cut with human hands, he will destroy the wicked system of rule by fallen and rebellious human beings. Babylonitis, right? Like Nebuchadnezzar in his pride, setting up an image of himself and forcing people to worship it. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower to the realms of the gods. Let us make a name for ourselves. Christ will judge that system and destroy the entire thing. Read Revelation 19. And he will set up his everlasting, eternal kingdom on earth. And you know what? It's very important for us to realize tonight, if we don't know it already, that not everyone is going to be in that kingdom. The King, Jesus Christ, the Lord himself, said so. Look at this from Matthew 7:21-23. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, 'Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.'" Do you see the pride resident in this description? Lord, didn't we do all these things in your name? Didn't we do all these wonders? Didn't we cast out those demons? Didn't we prophesy? The way into Christ's kingdom is not predicated on the basis of whatever good we may think we're doing. Rather, the way into his kingdom, the way into a relationship with Christ, doing the will of the Father, is to begin by acknowledging what Christ, God the Son, has done for us. We're not able to do anything really for him. Our salvation, our deliverance, it rests completely upon Christ's death on the cross, the shedding of his blood for our sins, and his powerful resurrection from the dead, so that we might not perish, but could have everlasting life. Take note of what Jesus says here, also in Matthew 7. "Enter by the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, to doom, to wrath, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Many unwittingly are on the broad road to destruction." Jesus says only a few will find the way to life. And he says that way is difficult, not because it requires hard work and dedication and perseverance and persistence. No, it's difficult because we have to realize that we can do nothing to earn salvation. It does not count upon us. We don't merit his favor by anything that we do, because we cannot do anything to merit it. Nothing matches up. All our righteousness are as filthy rags. We all fall short of the righteousness of God. We can't work our way to heaven by what we do. In fact, what we have done in rebellion and sin, that's what's keeping us from heaven, you see. Our pride, our work, condemns us, not by any works of righteousness which we have done, but according to God's mercy, he has saved us. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For by grace you've been saved." That's an unmerited favor that comes from God. By grace you've been saved through faith, and even that faith is not of yourselves. Even your faith is a gift that God has given to you. It's not of any kind of works, lest anyone should boast. Pride, you see. Lest anyone be prideful by what they have done. Look what I've done to get my way into heaven. It doesn't work that way, friend. You can't do anything. Once you realize that there is nothing you can do to please God, nothing that you can do to earn a place at his table in the kingdom, once you realize that and acknowledge it in your heart, then you're prepared in heart to acknowledge before God that you must humbly surrender completely to Christ. Jesus has taken what you deserve from God, God's holy wrath, and he assumed that wrath upon himself on the cross, and so it's Jesus who delivers us from the wrath to come, as it says in 1 Thessalonians 1:10. Friend, if you have never confessed to him that you know you're a sinner, if you've never confessed to him that you know you need his deliverance from those sins, his salvation, by means of his sacrifice on the cross for you. If you have never done that, then you really need to do that right now, because there is no other way. Call upon Jesus to save you while there is still time to do it. Please just take a good look at where we are in these times of the Gentiles, where mankind is trying to run everything on earth. Tell me honestly, do you really see solutions to problems, or do you just see more and more problems developing? How much longer do you think this will go on? How long will it be before Christ returns in judgment? And yes, indeed, he does judge. He is the judge. I urge you, friend, get things right with him today. Call on him to save you. This is why he came. It's why you've been made, to have a relationship with him, and the only way to do it is through him. Call on him to save you, and he will. Why? Because he loves you. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes on him will not perish, but will have eternal life. Be ready, friend. Make sure you're ready. The time truly is short. If we at Macedonia Church can be of any kind of help to you at all with your relationship to Christ, please, please, please contact us. God bless you all. We'll be together again, either here or there or in the air.